Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. That's the name of the man formerly known as Prince Andrew, as it appears currently on his Wikipedia page, in the press, and on the royal website. Quite a long way to fall from Prince clout, especially given that Prince Andrew wasn't even, in fact, the extent of his previous full royal title. Because the man born His Royal Highness Prince Andrew became, on the date of his wedding in 1986, His Royal Highness the Duke of York, Earl of Inverness, and the Baron of Killyleagh. That lofty title wasn't far short of his actual name at birth, arguably the last occasion he was an equal amongst peers, when his name was Andrew Albert Christian Edward, with the surname Mountbatten Windsor, previously unused for royals, added for good measure not long after. And so for a large part of his life, Andrew was officially styled, deep breath, His Royal Highness Prince Andrew Albert Christian Edward, Duke of York, Earl of Inverness, and Baron of Killyleagh. Well, that is no longer the case. You already know the headlines by now. The British royal who, by way of a friendship with one of the worst people on earth, as well as other episodes of scandal and reckless stupidity, managed to see himself lifted out of official duty and into the depths of public disgrace. Today we'll look into this inglorious downfall and what is, without doubt, the single greatest royal scandal in British history. It was a brisk November day in 2010 when Jay Donnelly chanced upon the biggest scoop of his career. Donnelly, a British covert photographer based in New York, had been lurking alongside reporter Annette Witheridge near Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan mansion, with the pair having been recruited to take pictures of the disgraced celebrity. And given the nature of the crimes of which he'd been accused, far be it, in November 2010, that many of his former allies would be seen too close to him. Donnelly may have been within his rights to expect an uneventful afternoon at work that November day, but what he got was exactly the opposite. Stepping out of Epstein's home in the company of the financier was a silver-haired man in a dark jacket and jeans, who the British journalistic pair quickly identified as Andrew, brother of Prince Charles, and then fourth in line to the British throne. Donnelly and Witheridge tailed the man as they walked several hundred feet into Central Park and snapped several pictures of their deep conversation, unaware or concerned as the duo seemed with being spotted or recognised. Donnelly held onto the pictures and sold them to the British tabloids, leading to their publication in the News of the World in February 2011. And with that, a scandal that would bring down Andrew and rock the British royal establishment was ever so slowly set into motion. In the weeks after the photos were taken, but before they featured in the print, Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers in New York entered an appeal to have his registration as a Level 3 sex offender, one at high risk of repeat offence, reduced to Level 1, which is low risk. Bizarrely, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, led by Democrat Cyrus Vance, supported the move. But it was dismissed by the Manhattan Supreme Court under Judge Ruth Pickles, who expressed bewilderment that a New York prosecutor would make such a request on behalf of a serial sex offender. Pickles also affirmed that Epstein would have to personally check in with the New York Police Department every 90 days, but this was never actually enforced. Clearly, the wheels of justice were not moving very swiftly against Epstein. In fact, it would be nearly a decade before he'd be arrested for his crimes once more. But on the other side of the Atlantic, a different development would move much more quickly against his erstwhile friend, Prince Andrew. With the publication of the News of the World scoop in February, a media storm began to surround the prince. Within weeks, one publication after another latched on to the Epstein connection, something which became all the worse when it was revealed in March that the disgraced financier had helped Andrew's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, pay off debts she'd accrued through lavish spending. The scandal began to erupt, and the royal family came under increasing pressure to end Andrew's dubious role as the UK's special representative for trade and investment. He stepped down from the role months later in July 2011, but all this was really just the beginning. Various new revelations surrounding Andrew would follow in the years to come, and these included several that had been known to some in his orbit all along, and yet apparently none that were known or believed by Queen Elizabeth, who, it was thought, had always held Andrew as her favourite child of all. Andrew was born in February 1960 at Buckingham Palace, the third child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, and the first child born to a reigning monarch in more than 100 years. According to various accounts, the Queen displayed affection towards Andrew in a way she hadn't been able to with elder siblings Prince Charles and Princess Anne. He was born 8 years into his mother's reign, and like youngest child Edward, born 4 years later, he arrived at a time when the Queen had grown more comfortable in her role. What resulted was a pampered existence that seemed to have the exact results one would expect. As a toddler, Andrew was raised by a governess, and then, just like Charles and their father Philip, he was sent to Gordonston, a famously austere boarding school in Scotland. Unlike Charles, Andrew generally fit in at school, captaining the cricket team and being made a house prefect. After leaving, he did what many second-born royals had done before him and joined the military, training to be a helicopter pilot. And when the Falklands War began in 1982, he served for the full 10-week conflict, running helicopter missions from aboard the Navy warship HMS Invincible. The war wound up precipitating the apex of Andrew's popularity. At only 22 years old, he'd seen active combat, a rarity for a royal in the modern era, and by all accounts had performed his duties with competence. The press embraced him as a war hero, and when the HMS Invincible returned to Portsmouth after 5 months in the South Atlantic, Andrew was welcomed on the dock by his parents and large, adoring crowds. With no blemish on his record, and given the massive PR victory the war had spelt for Thatcher's government and the monarchy alike, Andrew was now the golden boy of the royal family. His image was further nourished by continued service in the Royal Navy, where he ultimately rose to the rank of commander before retiring in 2001. His 2 decades-long military career was longer than any other royal in the modern era, and it seemed, finally, that one of the Queen's children had earned public, genuine respect on his or her own merits. Of course, in reality, Andrew's character was far from unblemished, and over time, some of his misadventures started to become more known. Already in his childhood, the young prince had been known to royal staff as a bit of a git, apparently mistreating animals and being fond of aiming kicks at guard staff and groundskeepers. On one occasion, staff got sick of his antics and shoveled manure over the 5-year-old prince, although they reportedly managed to swerve trouble when even the Queen agreed her son had been that much of a little shit. At Gordonston, the pattern continued, and Andrew was despised as an arrogant and egotistical bully. He also gained the nickname the Sniggerer for his irritating laugh, coupled with crude, off-colour jokes. By the 1980s, as a young man dining out on a war hero image, Andrew gained the reputation of a bit of a party prince. Unlike the awkward and diffident Prince Charles, who was also chained to a high degree of decorum in anticipation of his kingship, Andrew was held to no comparable standards of discipline. He dated a string of women, including photographer and actress Koo Stark, and had a relationship which caused, arguably, the prince's first moment of in-house embarrassment when Stark's film credits, some of which included erotic themes, came to light. The British tabloid press began to call Andrew Randy Andy, a nickname that had reportedly followed him since Gordonston, but which he grew further into as his romantic escapades mounted in adulthood. Andrew was the royal spare, free to live for the moment, and generally his antics caused disapproval rather than absolute scorn. Being a carefree libertine was perhaps uncouth for a royal, but would be repeated by Prince Harry years later to no great lasting criticism. Moreover, Andrew was a respectable military officer and also had the crucial advantage of his mother's unwavering support. Although some displays of bad temper with the press caused minor criticism, neither this nor his playboy-like lifestyle caused him much reputational damage. Andrew did get married in 1986 to the famously undisciplined socialite Sarah Ferguson, known to the press as Fergie. The pair had actually known each other since childhood, occasionally crossing paths at things like polo matches, before being finally introduced in adulthood by Princess Diana. But their troublesome marriage, unlike Brother Charles's marriage to the much-beloved Diana, didn't do much for Andrew's image, and soon his previously affectionate press nicknames began to grow some fangs. Andrew and Fergie had 2 daughters, but their marriage was effectively over within 6 years, before being finalised by divorce in 1996. The separation was accompanied by various tabloid scandals involving Sarah, including topless photographs of her having her toes sucked by her, quote, financial advisor while holidaying in the south of France in 1992. Remarkably, and no doubt to the further embarrassment of the royal family, Andrew and Fergie remained close after their divorce. They continued to live together at the Royal Lodge in Windsor Great Park, an arrangement that raised eyebrows but persisted anyway. But for Andrew, more damning accusations were on the way. By the early 2000s, scattered reports began to surface about Andrew's behaviour towards staff and those he considered beneath him. Royal protection officers and palace employees described him as demanding, rude, and prone to furious outbursts over trivial matters. Tabloid dispatches listed a string of colourful insults that Andrew would direct towards security staff, as well as his petulant disregard for palace security protocols. Former protection officers later gave interviews describing him as the worst member of the royal family to work for, adding that he was known to guardsmen by a simple nickname beginning with C and rhyming with Hunt. In later years, more revelations would detail his bizarre, seemingly infantile obsessions, such as a collection of more than 70 teddy bears he kept in his quarters, and which he would viciously humiliate housemaids for failing to keep in their correct order. Andrew's post-naval career only amplified these patterns. In 2001, he became the UK's Special Representative for Trade and Investment, an obscure, semi-diplomatic role created especially for him, although his cousin, the Duke of Kent, had held a similar office beforehand. Through the unpaid position, Andrew travelled around the world, ostensibly to promote British business interests. In practice, though, the position seemed to provide him an excuse for a lavish lifestyle funded by British taxpayers. He flew by private jet, stayed in five-star hotels, and entertained on an extravagant scale. Between 2001 and 2011, he took more than 200 flights, many of them by helicopter, racking up astronomical costs that drew increasing scrutiny from the press and Parliament. And then there were the people he associated with. Jeffrey Epstein may later have been the most notorious, but his reputation in the early 2000s wasn't yet what it would become. In the meantime, Andrew was photographed alongside various oligarchs and arms dealers, as well as Saif Gaddafi, the son of the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, and Kazakh billionaire tycoon Timur Kulibayev, who suspiciously bought Andrew's Sunning Hill Park home for £15 million, 5 times £3 million asking price. Andrew also received major criticism for lobbying on behalf of the Azerbaijani dictator Ilham Aliyev and various well-connected special interest groups. He was described by Channel 4 in 2011 as the cheerleader-in-chief for the arms industry. The Queen seemed entirely blind to criticism of her son, even as it rose in volume. She defended his appointment to the trade role and continued to include him prominently in official royal events. Even so, it wasn't the misguided faith of the aging Queen, or even Andrew's associations with arms dealers and shady billionaires, which ultimately tested public patience the most. Instead, it was his long-standing friendship with Epstein, whose image fell off a cliff following his conviction in 2008. As it turned out, theirs was a friendship much closer than Andrew would retrospectively try to claim, and brought what he and his ex-wife had gone up to into very dark territory altogether. And the murky relationship started through a mutual connection Andrew had made on the London social circuit all the way back in the 1980s. Ghislaine Maxwell was born in the exclusive commune of Maison Lafitte near Paris in 1961. Like Andrew, she was born to a family that had it all, although in her case, controversy embroiled her long before the Epstein scandal killed what remained of her and Andrew's reputations later in the 21st century. Ghislaine was the ninth and youngest of Robert Maxwell, a Czechoslovak-born media tycoon and Labour Party politician who earned his fortune by acquiring the publishing company Pergamon Press in 1946. By the 1980s, Maxwell's portfolio included the Daily Mirror and other publications, a media presence which allowed significant political influence and a challenge to Rupert Murdoch and the rival News Corp empire. But Robert Maxwell died suddenly in 1991 after mysteriously disappearing from his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, off of the Canary Islands. Soon after, investigators discovered that he'd looted hundreds of millions of pounds from Mirror Group pension funds to prop up his other crumbling businesses. This left thousands financially devastated, in turn resulting in public outrage and successive legal battles. The Maxwell family name had become synonymous with corporate fraud and betrayal. Ghislaine had grown up in the comfort of their family mansion in Oxfordshire, attending the fee-paying Marlborough College before studying modern history at Oxford. By the 1980s, she was active in London's high-end social scene, where mutual connections led her into the circle of Prince Andrew. Over the following years, they would be seen together so often that Buckingham Palace staff even suspected they were dating. Ghislaine relocated to New York permanently after her father's death in 1991, and amidst the scandal that saw two of her brothers arrested arrested and the family name plunged into disrepute. With her social clout in tatters, Maxwell devoted herself instead to cracking the same circuit on Manhattan's elite Upper East Side. Luckily for her, she soon met Jeffrey Epstein, a financier with mysterious sources of wealth and, more importantly, powerful connections, which paved Maxwell's route back into high society. She, in turn, brought Epstein the overseas connections he craved by introducing him to British royalty, as well as other celebrities from around the world. By the mid-1990s, Maxwell had become both Epstein's lover and an integral part of his operation, helping to manage his properties and organise his social calendar. She also became the chief accomplice, as later described by police, and a key facilitator in something much darker: Epstein's depraved interest in young girls. Back in the UK, by that time, Andrew had suffered several of his own, often Fergie-related scandals, although he still enjoyed a generally favourable public image. He was still in the Royal Navy and about to be elevated to the post of Commander, the highest rank of his career, albeit the 6th highest rank in the Navy overall. That same period saw the royal family experience one of its greatest ever setbacks, which is of course the death of Princess Diana in 1997, causing enormous public upset and led to trust in the monarchy plummeting. But this was mainly something for Lady Di's ex-husband and future King Charles to worry about. Andrew, the spare, could look forward to what would soon become his cushy new role as the special envoy for trade. By this time, through Maxwell, he'd become quite well acquainted with Epstein and regularly visited the financier at his Manhattan mansion, his private Caribbean island, later nicknamed Pedophile Island, and also at his Palm Beach estate in Florida. He often travelled using Epstein's private plane, nicknamed the Lolita Express, and appeared alongside Epstein and Maxwell at various social gatherings, from parties in New York to a bash at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate, and to various weddings and other functions. Andrew also lavishly hosted the pair at royal estates in the UK, from Balmoral to Sandringham, and also appearing with Maxwell at the Royal Ascot races in 2000. Sarah Ferguson, by now Andrew's ex-wife, also became part of the murky cabal, and throughout all the years of the group's friendship, none in Andrew's circle seemed to recognise, or just chose not to acknowledge, any of the disturbing realities behind Epstein's wealth and lifestyle. But his predatory behaviour was about to explode into public view. The first cracks in the facade came in 2005 when the parents of a 14-year-old girl reported to Florida police that their daughter had been molested by Epstein at his Palm Beach mansion. The subsequent investigation uncovered a web of shocking abuse involving dozens of underage girls. As the revelations accrued, those who'd been associated with Epstein or benefited from his many financial donations began to distance themselves from him. And yet Epstein and Maxwell turned up at the Royal Lodge to attend the 18th birthday party of Beatrice, Andrew and Fergie's eldest daughter, in July 2006. An infamous photo of the pair from the party, alongside since disgraced mogul Harvey Weinstein, later surfaced. Andrew eventually claimed he was somehow unaware of an arrest warrant for Epstein that had, by then, been issued in the US for the sexual assault of a minor. Epstein was arrested in Florida 8 days after the Royal Lodge party. The accusations against the financier led to his 2008 trial and a lenient 18-month prison sentence. Despite major public outrage, Epstein's powerful connections seem to have shielded him from any serious consequences. But the scandal had, at least, resulted in more women who'd suffered under Epstein bringing their stories to light. This includes Virginia Roberts-Jeffrey, whose accounts of her own abuse would eventually bring the scandal to the door of Andrew directly. In the meantime, public scrutiny began to mount independently, as the 2011 Central Park photos seemed to suggest that Andrew had maintained his friendship with a convicted pedophile even after his conviction 3 years previously. Donnelly's photos of the pair in Central Park caused uproar, which Andrew tactlessly explained by claiming he travelled to New York only to break the friendship off in person. Critics questioned why such a mission required a multi-day stay at Epstein's mansion, not least given Andrew's routine habit of expensive stays at hotels, as well as the availability of the British Consulate General only a 5-minute drive away. The photograph of the two men together reignited questions about Andrew's associations and judgment, and the resulting pressure led to his stepping down as trade envoy. But the scandal grew dramatically in 2015 when Virginia Jeffrey's allegations were included in a US court filing, bringing them directly into the public domain. Jeffrey alleged that she'd been trafficked on 3 occasions to have sex with Prince Andrew, once at Epstein's New York mansion, once as part of an orgy with 8 other trafficked girls on Epstein's private Caribbean island, and once at a townhouse belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell in London. All of this had apparently taken place in 2001, around the time Andrew left the Navy and embarked on his flashy, all-expenses-paid new trade envoy role. It was also a time when Jeffrey was only 17 years old. Andrew and the palace were quick to deny the allegations, but what surfaced was one of the most damaging pieces of evidence from the entire debacle. A photograph from March 2001, ostensibly taken at Maxwell's London townhouse. The image showed Andrew with his arm around the waist of Jeffrey, with Maxwell smiling in the background. The photograph appeared to corroborate Jeffrey's account of being trafficked to London and became one of the most analysed images in modern royal history. Although the claims were subsequently struck from that case, the damage was done. Major media outlets could now report the allegations without fear of legal repercussions. Andrew laboured to deny all wrongdoing, but pressure mounted for him to address the allegations publicly. By 2019, the situation had become untenable. In July, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested once again on federal charges of sex trafficking minors in Florida and New York, and prosecutors again alleged he'd abused dozens of girls between 2002 and 2005. The new charges, coupled with widespread media coverage exposing the inadequacy of his 2008 plea deal, ignited the full fury of a transatlantic media firestorm. Alexander Acosta, the prosecutor from the previous case, was forced to resign from his role as Secretary of Labour. Harvard and MIT, both of which had accepted donations from Epstein in the past, faced scrutiny as to the nature of their arrangements. Figures like Donald Trump and Bill Clinton also faced uncomfortable questions over suspected links to Epstein. And prominent lawyer Alan Dershowitz, who'd helped negotiate Epstein's previous non-prosecution agreement, was named by Jeffrey as an individual to whom she'd also been trafficked for sex. But it was Andrew's name which stood higher than most others in the debacle, especially given the poorly explained 2001 photograph and his suspected continued association with Epstein after the 2008 case. On August the 10th, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his Manhattan jail cell in what was ruled a suicide by hanging. It automatically resulted that the criminal case against him was dismissed, since under US law, a defendant could not be prosecuted after death. For Andrew, this meant there would not be a trial that might have provided answers. But the murky nature of Epstein's death intensified scrutiny of everyone in his orbit, especially those with power and privilege. The walls were closing in, and Andrew's decades of denials were about to face their greatest test yet. Even at his peak of popularity, Andrew was never known as any kind of brainiac. The consistent ties to tycoons and dictators, public figures accused of corruption, and various other abuses, as well as his reputationally damaging tabloid-filling relationship with Fergie, had made Andrew look, at best, naive and generally tone-deaf to his public reputation. Now, Andrew had led himself into the most severe controversy of his public life, and he managed to cement his own downfall by way of one of the most catastrophic television interviews in history. 3 months after Epstein's death, and almost 10 years to the day since the pair had been photographed together in Central Park, Andrew sat down for an interview at Buckingham Palace with BBC Newsnight, led by presenter Emily Maitlis. The interview had been orchestrated by Newsnight producer Sam McAllister, who'd spent months negotiating access through the palace. The interview represented a major departure from what had become the royal family's aversion to unscripted, uncontrolled media appearances, especially concerning controversial subjects. This had followed several damaging interviews in the 1990s, such as when Prince Charles admitted to adultery in a 1994 segment with ITV, and when Diana revealed her bulimia, depression, and marital breakdown in an infamous interview with BBC Panorama a year later. The Queen reportedly did not sanction the Newsnight interview, leaving it to the discretion of Andrew and his press team. But Andrew seemed convinced he could control the narrative of the discussion, and so the 50-minute-long interview took place in Buckingham's Blue Room, with the palace offering unprecedented technical medical access and even waiving pre-screening rights. An extraordinary concession. This turned out to be one of many mistakes, and the interview turned out to be one of the most memorable car crashes in the history of public television. Among Andrew's many dubious and extraordinary claims, he repeated that he had no recollection of ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, and he could not have slept with her on the night that she claimed because he'd taken 12-year-old Beatrice to a pizza store in the London borough of Woking. He downplayed the closeness of his relationship with Epstein, whilst simultaneously admitting to meeting up with the North America-based financier multiple times per year at each of his properties. He described Epstein's crimes as unbecoming, a statement that caused disbelief even to the most mildly spoken Emily Maitlis. It would only get worse. With regard to the notorious photograph of himself with Giuffre, he once again declared no memory of having ever met her, and speculated that the hand around her waist may not have been, in fact, his hand. With regard to his infamous Central Park walk, he claimed to have met with Epstein only to break off their relationship, and explained that he remained a total of 4 days at the mansion because he had other duties in New York and it was, quote, a convenient place to stay. With regard to the very choice of meeting with a known sex offender at his home in the first place, he resolutely described it as his own decision, born in part of his tendency to be too honourable. When offered the relatively seamless opportunity to disavow his relationship with Epstein, Andrew inexplicably failed to express regret at the friendship, rationalising that the people he met through the friendship were of great value to him, and almost commending Epstein's ability to, quote, bring extraordinary people together. In what was perhaps his most outlandish statement of all, he refuted Giuffre's account of a night they'd spent in London's Tramp nightclub together, explaining that he did not know where the bar was in that nightclub and that he could not, as she described, have been sweating because of a medical condition he developed following the Falklands War, which left him unable to sweat. The interview was released to the public 2 days after recording, and the fallout was little shy of nuclear. Journalists and commentators called it catastrophic, a train wreck, and a PR disaster. What remained of public support for Andrew vanished, as a YouGov survey found that only 6% of the public believed his account, and the majority believed he should step back from royal duties permanently. His statements were lampooned on public media, on television shows, and in the press. Multiple online commentators broke down Andrew's body language and expressed dubiousness at even the less contested statements he'd made. Support for Epstein's victims rose dramatically, while support for the monarchy crumbled. Only 4 days later, Andrew announced that he would step back from public duties for the foreseeable future. The interview went on to live in infamy, later being depicted by a 2024 biographical drama produced by Netflix and a 3-part Amazon MGM series produced by Maitlis herself. Maitlis also later reflected on Andrew's bizarre statements during their interaction, describing how, on several occasions, she thought he would realise the oafishness of some of his statements and how damaging they would be to his image. He didn't. In fact, the palace staff reportedly treated the interview as a success and celebrated its smooth execution the same evening. Within days, the palace was forced into full-blown crisis containment. The Newsnight piece was also a massive coup for the BBC, which had only a few years before come under great scrutiny for its handling of the Jimmy Savile sex abuse case, and had also recently come under pressure for bullying and toxic work environment allegations. The BBC would later have several more significant scandals, something we may indeed come to cover on this channel in the future, so stay tuned. Meanwhile though, having stepped back from royal duties, Andrew retreated to the Royal Lodge residence he shared with his ex-wife and hoped the intensity of the scandal would die down. It didn't. There remained so much more to come. In August 2021, Virginia Giuffre brought a civil case in New York against the now disgraced prince, accusing him of sexual assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Andrew's lawyers attempted to have the case thrown out, arguing that a settlement between Giuffre and Epstein in 2009 protected him by extension, but this was rejected by the judge, thereby allowing the case to proceed to trial. In January of 2022, Andrew was then stripped of his royal patronages and military titles and retreated even further out of view. The following month, he reached an out-of-court settlement with Giuffre, paying her an undisclosed financial sum estimated by mainstream media at between 14 and 16 million US dollars, as well as a, quote, substantial donation to Miss Jeffries' charity in support of victims' rights. The settlement allowed Andrew to swerve admitting liability or guilt, but the opaque arrangement did nothing to reduce public enmity against him. In April 2024, Virginia Jeffrey then took her own life. Shortly before, she dropped a civil suit against Alan Dershowitz and stated that she may have been mistaken in identifying him as one of her abusers. Nearly 18 months after her death, Jeffrey's memoir, Nobody's Girl, was published. In it, she repeated her claims about having been trafficked on 3 occasions for sex with Prince Andrew. She also described having been, quote, habitually used and humiliated and sometimes choked, bloodied, and forced into sadomasochism, during which she prayed to black out. She also claimed that in July 2001 she was sedated and woke up in a pool of blood with an incision on her stomach, being told she'd had a miscarriage, but which she believed was instead an ectopic pregnancy. Public opinion of Andrew then fell even further, sinking from distrust to outright revulsion. And yet, somehow, still more revelations would follow, and as ever before, Sarah Ferguson played no small part in ensuring her and Andrew remained in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. All the way back in 2010, Ferguson had caused a scandal when she was recorded offering access to Andrew to a journalist in exchange for a princely £500,000 upfront payment. In the following years, her financial woes remained on display and led to greater consternation in 2011 when it was revealed that Epstein had sent her £15,000 to pay off an employee to whom she owed arrears. It was also revealed that she, too, had visited Epstein in Florida on at least one occasion. In the wake of Jeffrey's memoir, the British Mail on Sunday revealed leaked emails suggesting that Ferguson had celebrated Epstein's release from prison in 2009 by visiting him in New York with her 2 daughters. A representative for Ferguson stated that neither she nor her daughters had any recollections of such a visit. Then another email, found to have been sent by Ferguson in January 2010, reportedly showed she was seeking more than the £15,000 received from Epstein and had asked for 50 or 100,000 US dollars instead. An email sent by Epstein to a friend also implied that he'd bankrolled Ferguson for over 15 years. In Andrew's case too, more was to come. Jeffrey's book alleged that Andrew's protection team had attempted to hire internet trolls to harass or discredit her, and that Andrew had passed Jeffrey's date of birth and social security number to a taxpayer-funded officer to, quote, dig up dirt on her. The Metropolitan Police Service publicly acknowledged that it was looking into Jeffrey's claims, and then, in mid-October, more leaked emails revealed that Andrew had kept contact with his sex offender friend longer than he previously claimed. He sent an email to Epstein in February 2011, 3 months after their central pub meeting, which, as he had empathetically told Emily Maitlis and Newsnight, was supposedly their final contact. In the same email, he was also found to have made an ominous declaration of friendship to Epstein, stating, "We are in this together, and I will have to rise above it." Fergie, never to be outdone, was found to have sent her own email to Epstein, even later still in April, and in that email she humbly apologised to Epstein for having appeared to distance herself from him, writing that he had been a steadfast, generous, and supreme friend. This was especially distasteful since only a month before she'd gone on public record to state that taking money from Epstein had been an enormous mistake and she wouldn't deal with him again. Seemingly, the famously unreliable Duchess's avoidance of Epstein had lasted just only a handful of weeks. With this, the gig was finally up for Andrew. A new poll found that 91% of Britons held a negative view of him by October 2025, and his brother, by now King Charles III, finally announced a formal process to remove Andrew's remaining titles, styles, and honours. And with that, Prince Andrew, former Duke of York, became plain old Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Only the Dukedom of York, a peerage title, technically remains with him because this would require an Act of Parliament to be revoked. And with that, Andrew and Fergie were also asked to vacate their home at Royal Lodge in the Windsor Park estate. Theoretically, as a commoner, Andrew may now also be more vulnerable to further criminal or civil cases, depending on jurisdiction related to his actions in the past. His fall from grace, whilst spectacular, may not yet have seen its zenith. And perhaps there's more to the story to come. So, make sure to remain subscribed if you've not done so already.